The keys didn't feel like keys anymore. They felt like a verdict. Daniel pressed them into my hand like he couldn't bear the touch to last. "It's just better this way, Mom," he said. Not shouted, not whispered, just said, final and flat. I looked past his shoulder at the door I painted with my late husband 20 years ago. The blue had faded in the sun, but the little scratch under the handle was still there. A memory from when Daniel tripped on his first day of high school, scuffing it with his backpack. I never painted over it. "Better for who?" I asked, though my voice didn't sound like mine. It felt smaller, thinner. From the living room I could hear Elise's voice, his wife, low, measured, telling their daughter to turn down the TV, as if this moment was ordinary. The ticking clock above the fireplace pulsed louder than my own heartbeat. Tick, 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 like it was counting how long I had left. I tightened my grip around the keys. They dug into my palm. My wedding band shifted slightly, loose on my thinning fingers. Daniel avoided my eyes. "You'll be more comfortable somewhere quieter. You said the neighbors were loud, remember?" I hadn't. Not like that. I said I missed the sound of the wind chimes Mrs. Field used to hang next door. But that wasn't noise. That was music. He stepped back. Not a hug, not a kiss on the cheek, just a single step back, like I was already gone. I didn't cry. Not yet. My tears knew better than to fall in front of Elise. I walked out slowly, my shoes brushing the same doormat that used to say, "Home Sweet Home," before the print faded. The sun had dipped below the trees, and the porch light hadn't been replaced since it started flickering last month. I reached for it out of habit, then stopped myself. Behind me, the door clicked shut. And I stood there, holding the keys to a house that no longer had room for me. But what hurt most, what I still don't understand, is how my own son could make me feel like a guest in my own life. You don't raise a child thinking one day they'll hand you your house keys like an eviction notice. I wasn't a perfect mother, but I was there. Every fever, every parent-teacher meeting, every scraped knee, those were mine to tend. When his father passed, Daniel was barely 6. I remember holding him during the funeral, his tiny hands clutching my black dress like they could anchor him to something that wouldn't leave. We didn't have much, but we had enough. I worked mornings at the clinic, evenings at the bakery. On weekends, I cleaned apartments. I used to joke that if someone dropped a crumb in this city, I probably swept it up. I kept a little blue jar in the kitchen, our savings jar. It was dented on one side from when Daniel knocked it over reaching for cookies. We never threw it away. Every time I dropped coins in, I told him, "This is for your future." He used to shake it like a present and say, "One day I'll buy you a mansion, Mama." We laughed about it. I believed him. I gave him the bigger portion at dinner, the better pillow, the front seat. He never asked, I just gave. That's what mothers do. You love quietly, consistently, like boiling water. You don't notice how hot it's become until everything's burned. When he got that scholarship, I clapped so hard my hands stung. He hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. I thought, he remembers. He knows what it took to get here. I didn't see the drift start. Not at first. It was in small things. Calls that got shorter, visits that got quieter, gifts that got colder. A birthday perfume he bought me smelled just like the one Elise wore. I told myself it was a coincidence. But deep down, I knew. The man who stood at the door with my house keys wasn't the little boy who used to press drawings into my palm and say, "I made this for you." I just didn't want to believe they were the same hands, that maybe they always had been. Elise never raised her voice. That's what made it harder. If she'd yelled, I might have stood up for myself, but she was soft, polite, the kind of woman who smiled with her lips, but never her eyes. It started with the kitchen. My red mug disappeared. The one Daniel made me in middle school. I found it once in the back of a cabinet, stained with lipstick that wasn't mine. The next week, the spice rack changed. She said she read a blog about open shelving. My labels, handwritten, fading, were tossed. She replaced them with clear jars and typed tags. "You don't mind, do you, Mama?" she asked sweetly. I smiled. I said nothing. Then came the couch. The one my husband picked before he passed. It was old, sure. The cushions sagged, but it held memories. Sunday naps, late-night movies, Daniel's first Tooth Fairy dollar lost between the cushions. Gone. Donated, she said. We needed something more modern. I said nothing again. My bedroom became the guest room. Then the guest room became Elise's home office. I was moved upstairs, steep, narrow steps that made my knees ache. They offered to help me move my things. Most of them didn't make it up. At dinner, my seat shifted. I used to sit across from Daniel. One night, I came down and found their daughter, Lila, in my chair. She likes sitting by Daddy, Elise said. I nodded. I said nothing. The walls changed next. Family photos rearranged. My husband's smile now tilted in the farthest hallway. The wedding portrait? Replaced with their beach trip photo. Daniel holding Lila on his shoulders, Elise in a wide-brimmed hat. The house didn't fight back. It simply forgot me. I started spending more time in the garden. The roses didn't mind when I talked too long. The lavender bloomed for me, not to spite me. But I should have known. Even the garden would go. She wanted a deck put in, said the weeds were unruly. My hands still smelled of earth when I came inside to find something missing again. My chair, the one I always sat in. Vanished from the living room like I never existed. I started the soup in the morning, just after sunrise. Daniel used to love oxtail soup, his father's recipe. Slow-cooked bones, rich broth, softened carrots, the kind of dish that made the whole house smell like memory. I hadn't made it in years, not since before Elise, but something told me to try. I cleaned the bones, chopped the garlic, even used the chipped white pot my husband loved, the one with the faded red lid. It took hours, skimming the fat, adjusting the seasoning, humming to myself while the steam rose like a prayer. My knees ached, but my hands remembered the rhythm. I set the table early, laid out the spoons, lit a small candle, just like old times. Elise walked in, sniffed the air, and wrinkled her nose. "Is that meat?" she asked. "Oxtail. Daniel used to love it." She gave a tight smile. "The smell is kind of intense." I said nothing, just stirred the pot once more, gently, like I was cradling something alive. Daniel came home late, kissed Elise, scrolled through his phone, didn't even ask what I'd made. By the time dinner was supposed to start, I was alone in the kitchen. Candle burned low. The soup sat untouched. Then Elise walked in again. "We're ordering Thai," she said. "Daniel's had a long day." She picked up the pot, my pot, and turned toward the sink. "Elise, wait." But she didn't. The soup poured out in slow, sloshing waves. The scent of bone and bay leaf hit the metal, swirled down the drain. The pot clinked empty when she set it down. "I'll wash it later," she said, already walking away. I stared at the sink. The steam still hung in the air, like it hadn't realized what had happened. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, hands trembling, wondering how love could be poured out so carelessly, without a second glance. And in the silence that followed, I swear I heard something inside me crack. Something no one ever cleaned up. It started with a folder. Elise brought it in one Sunday afternoon, her voice extra sweet, like syrup covering something bitter. "Just a few things to look over, Mama. You know, for everyone's peace of mind." Daniel sat beside her, flipping through channels like he wasn't really there. The folder sat between them on the coffee table. Thick, too thick to be harmless. I reached for my reading glasses. The lenses were smudged. I cleaned them slowly, carefully, even though my heart had already begun to race. Elise leaned forward. "Just some routine documents, power of attorney, health directives, nothing urgent." Daniel nodded without looking at me. "Lots of families do this now. Makes things easier down the line." Easier for who? The papers used words I'd heard but never used. Irrevocable, fiduciary, beneficiary. There were blank spaces for initials, and dates, and signatures. My name was printed neatly at the top of every page. I don't understand most of this, I said. That's okay, Elise chirped. We can walk you through it. It's just formalities. But her pen was already uncapped. I looked at Daniel. Really looked at him. His jaw was tight, shoulders tense, not like someone helping his mother, like someone hoping she wouldn't ask too many questions. My hand hovered over the line. My fingers shook. I remembered signing my mortgage papers with my husband, how we laughed when I smudged my name. He said my signature always looked like it was dancing. This one felt like a funeral. I signed 2 pages, not 3. The third, I folded it quietly, slipped it into my sleeve when they stepped into the kitchen to check on Lila. Later, I tucked it behind a photograph on my nightstand, me in my wedding dress, laughing into the wind, veil tangled around my face. I didn't know what the document meant exactly, but I knew what not signing it meant. It meant I still had a name, and I wasn't ready to surrender it. I hadn't worn the ring in years. It was too loose now. Age has a way of thinning the fingers, but not the memories. I kept it in a little navy velvet box, tucked safely in my nightstand drawer, wrapped in a handkerchief embroidered with my initials. My husband gave it to me on our 10th anniversary. The diamond was small, but it sparkled like it knew something. One morning, after Elise reorganized the upstairs, I opened the drawer. The box was there, but the weight was wrong. I lifted the lid. Empty. At first, I thought maybe I'd moved it. Maybe I took it out and forgot. I searched my jewelry dish, the bathroom, my old coat pockets. Nothing. My hands felt colder than usual. That night at dinner, I asked carefully, "Has anyone seen a navy box? My wedding ring was inside." Elise barely looked up from her salad. "Oh? Maybe check the laundry? You've been moving things around a lot lately." Daniel just chewed. My voice was too steady when I said, "I haven't moved anything." She gave a polite laugh. "Well, memory slips, right?" I nodded. But inside, something started to twist. Not because of the lie, but because Daniel didn't even look at me. Not once. After they went to bed, I went back to my room and sat on the floor with my handbag. I took out what I had left, an old photo of Daniel in kindergarten, a lock of his baby hair I'd kept in wax paper, and a dried rose from my husband's funeral. I wrapped them in a scarf and sewed a small pocket into the lining. That night, I slept light, like prey. In the morning, I took the empty velvet box and placed it in my lap while sitting in the garden. The sun was setting. The light made everything golden except the inside of that box. And for the first time, I said it out loud. You are not losing your mind. You are being erased. And that is a very different thing. They called it a conversation, but it felt more like a boardroom meeting. We sat in the living room, Elise on the edge of the couch, legs crossed, clipboard on her lap, Daniel beside her, fingers laced tight like he was holding something in. "Mama," Elise began, "we've been thinking a lot about the future, and we feel like it's time to talk about boundaries." That word again, boundaries. Daniel cleared his throat. "You've done so much for us, but with Lila growing and Elise needing space to work, it's just getting crowded." Crowded? They meant me. I said nothing. I focused on the fireplace, the way the embers hissed beneath the ashes, soft and resentful. "We've found a few retirement options," Elise continued, sliding a brochure toward me like a condolence card. "Lovely places. Safe. Peaceful." I didn't touch it. Daniel spoke again. "You'd still be part of the family. But it's time for a new chapter. For all of us." "For all of us," I echoed. The words tasted like rust. They gave me until Sunday. Elise called it a grace period. Daniel kissed my forehead as if he were doing something merciful. I didn't flinch, but inside I was shrinking, curling in on myself like burnt paper. That night, I opened my closet and stared at my things. What would I take? My books? My quilt? The little ceramic bird Daniel made in 3rd grade, still chipped on the beak? I wandered into the kitchen. The fridge buzzed softly. On its door was a photo of Daniel, age 7, holding a worm in each hand, beaming with his whole face. That photo had been there for decades. It was tilted now. Elise must have cleaned the fridge. I straightened it. My fingers lingered. Sunday. 3 days from now, I would no longer live in the home I'd built. No longer sleep under the roof that caught my tears for years. They say you can't hear a heartbreak, but they're wrong. It sounds like the quiet tick of a kitchen clock. Counting down. The sewing tin hadn't been opened in years. It was my husband's, kept on the highest shelf of the hall closet, behind winter scarves and a box of Christmas lights that hadn't worked since Daniel was 10. I only went looking for it because Elise wanted the guest room cleared before Sunday. I opened it slowly, the lid creaking like it didn't want to be disturbed. Inside, buttons, old spools of thread, a faded needle cushion, and beneath it all, folded carefully, a piece of yellowing paper. My name was on it, written in his handwriting. I sat down on the floor, my heart stuttering. The envelope was unsealed. No date, just, in case things get hard and you feel alone. I read it once, then again, slower the second time. He'd written it after his diagnosis. I remembered him typing up financial lists, updating insurance papers. But this wasn't logistics. This was protection. He told me not to let grief turn into silence, that I had given my whole life in small pieces, but I was still whole, that if I ever felt pushed out by anyone, I was to call Mr. Adler. He's the only one I trust to defend your name the way I would. I hadn't thought about Mr. Adler in years. He handled our mortgage papers, helped us write our wills. Gentleman, quiet, sharp eyes. I held the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and something too clean to be home. From downstairs, Elise was on a work call, laughing too loud, like she owned the air. But here on the closet floor, I felt something return. Not anger, not yet, but memory and direction. He knew. My husband had seen far beyond the grave. He saw the way kindness could be mistaken for weakness, the way a woman like me could be made invisible, unless she chose otherwise. I folded the letter back gently. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered, and for the first time in weeks, my voice sounded like mine again. Mr. Adler's office still smelled like old books and lemon polish. I hadn't been there since my husband's funeral. The leather chairs hadn't changed. Neither had Mr. Adler. Slightly older now, perhaps. But his kindness was intact. He stood when I entered, shook my hand like I was someone who mattered. "I didn't expect to see you," he said gently. I handed him the letter. My fingers trembled just slightly. He read it, nodding slowly. "He was always thorough, your husband. One of the few men I've known who prepared more for others than for himself." We sat. I told him everything. Well, not everything. Just enough. About the pressure, the paperwork, the upcoming move. He listened, didn't interrupt. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a slim folder with a red tab. "I've been holding on to this," he said. "Your husband never transferred the deed. Legally, the house is still in your name. Fully." I stared at the paper like it was a foreign language. My name was printed at the top. Bold, official, unmoved. They never told me," I whispered. Mr. Adler nodded. "They wouldn't. It's common. Families assume ownership through habit. But unless you sign it over, they have no claim." He showed me my options. I could sell, I could lease, I could place it in a trust. Or, his finger tapped the line, I could maintain a life estate, keeping legal right to remain on the property even if sold. My breath caught. He waited, let the silence speak. "I don't want to leave," I said quietly, "but I also don't want to stay where I'm not wanted." He looked at me, eyes soft. "Then maybe it's time they learned whose house it really is." I left with the deed in my handbag. It felt heavier than paper should, like it carried years, like it carried me. Back home, Elise barely glanced up from her laptop. Daniel asked if I'd remembered to buy more almond milk. They wanted me out by Sunday, but they forgot something. The house remembers who it belongs to. I didn't mean to see her. The thrift store on Maple was just somewhere to go. Somewhere that didn't smell like Elise's citrus candles or sound like Daniel's half-hearted apologies. I needed air. I needed silence that didn't press against my skin. I was thumbing through a rack of old scarves when I heard a voice behind me. "Mrs. Ellison?" I turned, and there she was. Claire. Claire, with the same warm brown eyes I once thought I'd see in grandbabies. Her hair was shorter now, and she held a toddler on her hip. Not Daniel's child, someone else's new beginning. She smiled softly, unsure. "I almost didn't recognize you." I forced a smile. "You look well." She laughed gently. "You look tired." I blinked. Something in me nearly gave way. We walked through the aisles slowly. I picked up a porcelain teacup with a hairline crack along the rim. It looked delicate. Used, like me. Claire watched me set it down. "Are you okay?" she asked. My throat tightened. I nodded, then shook my head. "They're asking me to leave. The house. By Sunday." Claire didn't gasp. She didn't ask why. She just nodded like she'd known it was coming. "Elise?" she said. I gave a tight smile. Claire looked down at her daughter, who was tugging on her shirt. "Daniel always did listen to the loudest voice in the room." I laughed. Just once. A dry sound that felt strange in my chest. "I don't know where I'll go," I admitted. She looked at me then, not with pity, but with something sharper, protective. "Let me talk to someone," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "My father," she added. "You remember him?" I nodded. Whitaker, always firm, always watching. He'd offered to invest in Daniel's startup once, before everything collapsed. Claire never forgave what Daniel did, but her father, he never forgot. She scribbled a number on the back of a receipt and pressed it into my palm. "I don't like what they've done to you," she said. And I'm not the only one. The cracked teacup stayed on the shelf, but I walked out of that store holding something much more valuable, a name. The call came 2 days later. I was in the back garden, pulling weeds from around the hydrangeas. The house loomed behind me, too quiet, too clean. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my apron. "Mrs. Ellison," said a calm, familiar voice. "It's Richard Whitaker." I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion," he continued, "but Claire told me what's been happening." I swallowed. "It's a bit complicated." "I imagine it is," he said. "But I don't believe in letting decent people be pushed out of their own homes." There was a pause. I sat on the stone bench, my phone cradled between my ear and shoulder. My fingers drifted to the envelope in my apron pocket, the last letter Daniel ever wrote me as a teenager. "Thanks for never giving up on me," it said, written in blue ink with messy edges. Now they wanted me gone, by Sunday. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. "I understand the deed is in your name." "Yes." "Well," he said, "I have a few quiet options available. One of my holdings could purchase the house. You'd retain full life rights. No one would know it was me. It would appear routine." My heart started to race. "I'm not interested in retribution," he continued. "But I believe in consequences. Daniel made his choices. So did Elise. They don't get to pretend ownership simply because they've shouted the loudest." I said nothing for a long moment. "I'll need time to think," I finally whispered. "Of course," he said, "but don't wait too long. People like them, they're counting on your silence." We ended the call, and I sat there for a while, holding that old envelope, its paper soft from years of folding and unfolding. Daniel used to write me letters when he couldn't sleep. I kept every one. Now, I was deciding if I'd keep him. The wind rustled the lavender. Somewhere inside, Elise was vacuuming over the floor I laid with my husband's hands, and for the first time in weeks, I imagined what it would feel like for them to knock on my door and find I didn't answer. I packed slowly, not because I was sad, though I was, but because I wanted to remember. Every item I touched had a story,
and I wasn't willing to rush their goodbyes. The suitcase I chose was soft blue, with a scuff near the bottom from our trip to the coast. The last trip Daniel and I took before Elise, back when laughter came easy. I folded 3 blouses. My warmest coat, a book of poems my husband used to read aloud on rainy mornings. I found his tie tucked behind a drawer, navy, a little frayed. I pressed it to my cheek before laying it flat in the bottom of the case. There wasn't room for everything, so I chose symbols over quantity. The ceramic sugar bowl with the tiny chip that Daniel swore gave it character. The recipe card for oxtail soup, faded and stained, with my husband's notes scribbled in the corner. More garlic, always more. A photo of us, me, Daniel, and our son at a picnic. Grass stains on his knees, joy in his grin. I didn't pack anger or shame. Elise appeared in the hallway, arms crossed lightly. "You'll be out by morning?" I met her eyes. "Yes." She tilted her head, waiting for something. A plea, a thank you, a fight. She got silence. After she left, I walked through each room once more, not to mourn, to mark. The spot where Daniel took his first steps. The corner where the Christmas tree always leaned a little. The closet where I once cried so hard I thought I'd go blind. Then the garden. I watered the lavender, not because it needed it, but because I did. I pressed my palm against the porch rail. The wood was still warm from the afternoon sun, and then, with my bag in one hand and the recipe card tucked in my coat pocket, I walked away. Not because they asked me to, but because I was choosing to. And in that choice, I felt something they'd never expected me to have: power. The signing took 23 minutes. That's all it took to change the shape of my silence. Mr. Whitaker's assistant met me at a quiet notary office on the edge of town. No headlines, no drama, just tidy papers, a calm clerk, and a silver pen that felt too elegant for what I was about to do. Funny thing, I'd used that same kind of pen to sign my marriage certificate. Decades earlier, in a chapel that smelled of lilies and aftershave. That day, I signed away my maiden name. This day, I signed away the illusion of being small. I sold the house to Whitaker Holdings, LLC. Quietly, cleanly. In the agreement, I retained a full-life estate on the back studio, the tiny guest unit that Elise had once dismissed as dead space. Now, it was mine, legally, permanently, and they would never see it coming. When I returned to the property, I waited until nightfall. My things were already in the studio. A single bed, my books, a kettle, a chair that didn't get donated. It smelled like cedar and fresh beginnings. From the shadows, I watched Elise and Daniel on the front porch, sipping wine, looking over mood boards on her tablet. "We'll knock out that wall," she said. "Expand the kitchen, finally make it ours." Daniel nodded. "Without her here, it already feels different." I didn't flinch. They had no idea. No idea that beneath their shoes, beneath their future plans and self-satisfaction, the ground had shifted. Ownership was no longer theirs. I tucked the deed copy into a folder beside my recipe card and my husband's letter. No victory dance, no announcement. I didn't need applause, just air. And the quiet promise that the next time someone tried to erase me, they'd find my name written in ink, the permanent kind. They came with tape measures and tool belts, wearing big grins and louder boots. 3 contractors arrived that morning, laughter echoing through the driveway as they high-fived Daniel and unrolled their blueprints like they were laying down the future. From the back studio, I watched it all. The studio's window faced the side yard, just enough of an angle to see the porch, the front door, the rose bush Elise wanted to rip out. Elise stood with her tablet, giving direction like a producer on a movie set. "This wall's coming down," she said, pointing. "Too dark, and that weird arch? Gone." Daniel chimed in. "We want light, modern, clean. No more clutter." Clutter. They meant my memories. I sat with my tea, the cup warming my hands. No bitterness, no gloating. Just a quiet awareness that the story they thought they were writing
had already turned the page. One of the contractors whistled. "This place has good bones." I smiled. Yes, it does. I saw Elise flip through her sketches. Bright kitchens, wide-open spaces, a layout eerily similar to what the house used to be, before they made me erase it piece by piece. Funny, isn't it? How people tear things apart only to build back what they never appreciated in the first place. I remembered picking those cabinets with my husband. The paint swatches spread across the dining table, the late-night arguments about tiles, the laughter when we spilled primer on the dog. They'd never know those stories lived in the walls they were so eager to smash. Daniel took a selfie in front of the porch. "New era," the caption read, with a rocket emoji. He looked proud. I took another sip of tea. The sky was beginning to darken. They were celebrating a beginning. And I was watching, knowing the ending was already sealed in ink and law. I stood up and pulled the curtains closed. Not all the way, just enough. Then I whispered to myself softly, like a lullaby. Not quite. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The sun was warm, the air smelled faintly of cut grass, and the roses I'd trimmed that morning were beginning to open. I was in the studio, putting away laundry, when I heard it. Jiggle, twist, pause. Again, then louder. Twist, click, rattle. I stepped to the window and moved the curtain just an inch. Daniel stood at the front door, keys in hand, frowning. He tried again, a third time. He muttered something under his breath and looked at the keys like they'd betrayed him. Elise walked up behind him, sipping an iced coffee. "What's wrong?" "It won't turn," he said, shaking the knob. "It's stuck." She tried next. Same result. Then she saw it. The plaque. Small, discreet, freshly mounted just beside the front door. Whitaker Holdings. Private property. Elise stepped back. Her face shifted. That fake calm of hers cracked at the edges. I could see it all from my window. Daniel pulled out his phone, called someone, then someone else. The contractor, the locksmith, the county records office. Each call ended the same. Shoulders slumping, frustration building. The locks had been changed. The title had been transferred. Legally, quietly, entirely. They didn't own the house. They never had. From my window, I could see the shape of Daniel's confusion curdling into something uglier. His face was pale, his hands clenched. Elise kept asking questions he couldn't answer. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just stepped outside with my watering can and tended to the garden like I had every Thursday for the past 20 years. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. Some truths don't need repeating. When I went back inside, I locked the door to my studio, the only one that still opened. The sound of Daniel knocking on a house that no longer answered him echoed like a song I didn't feel like singing. And as I sat down with a cup of tea, I looked at the keys they gave me when they kicked me out, the ones they thought were useless. Turns out they just didn't know which door they opened anymore. He came back different, not shouting, not flustered, just quiet. I was in the garden again when he pulled up. He didn't look at me, didn't even glance toward the studio. He stood in the driveway a long time, staring at the front door like it might apologize if he waited long enough. He'd been to the county office. I knew that much. The dust on his shoes said he'd walked somewhere official. The stack of papers under his arm told the rest. I went inside and set down my gloves. Didn't speak. Not yet. Through the curtain, I watched him sit on the front step, elbows on knees, head in his hands. The papers sat beside him like unwanted mail. Eventually, I opened my door. He looked up, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight. "I saw the name," he said quietly. I said nothing. "Whitaker Holdings," he added. "Signed by Richard Whitaker." He let the name hang in the air like smoke. Claire's father, the man Daniel once called old money with old grudges. The one who offered to back Daniel's app idea years ago, before Daniel cheated, before Claire left. The man Daniel dismissed with a laugh and a handshake he never returned. Now that name was on the deed, in bold print. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at me like he was seeing something for the first time. Not a mother, not a victim. A woman who hadn't just survived, but planned. "I didn't know," he whispered. I nodded slowly. "You never asked." He stood, wobbled a bit, then picked up the papers and walked toward the car. Not storming, not stomping, just walking, like a man who wasn't sure where to go anymore. I closed my door, locked it, then sat with my tea, staring at the wall where my husband's picture used to hang before Elise took it down. And I smiled, not because he hurt, but because he finally saw what power looks like when it wears pearls and keeps receipts. The phone rang just before sunset. Not my cell, the landline. The old one my husband installed in the studio back when it was his office. Beige plastic, spiral cord, faint crack on the handset from when Daniel dropped it, trying to call into a radio contest. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Silence. Then, "Mom, it's me." His voice had lost something, that polished confidence he always wore like cologne. It was gone. I didn't know who else to call." I said nothing. He took a shaky breath. "This thing with the house, it's gotten complicated." Another pause. "I went to the county office. I've seen the paperwork. I need to understand. Did you plan this with Whitaker?" His voice cracked slightly on the name. I let the silence answer for a moment, then I said, "It's all legal, all clean." He sighed. "Elise is losing it. Contractors walked off the job. The bank froze one of our accounts, something about the lien on the permits." Still, I said nothing. "Could you just talk to him? To Whitaker? Maybe tell him to back off a little?" I looked around the studio. Sunlight fell across my old bookshelf, the one Elise had wanted to throw out. My teacup sat beside a folded quilt. Peace lived here now. "I'm not in charge of his decisions," I said softly. Daniel was quiet. I heard something in the background. Elise shouting? A child crying? I couldn't tell. "I just thought you wouldn't want it to go this far." I closed my eyes. This far? I remembered the soup down the drain. The papers slid across the table, the wedding ring missing, the chair that vanished. My name erased room by room, and still I kept my voice even. "I hope you figure things out," I said. He said my name, Mom, one more time. I hung up gently. The dial tone buzzed like a fly in a quiet room. I left the receiver off the hook for a while, let him sit in the silence he once handed to me. He knocked at 10:12 a.m. I'd been expecting him, but not like this. Daniel stood at my door, his posture stiff, eyes shadowed. Behind him, Claire, and just beside her, Mr. Whitaker, in a charcoal blazer and a patience that felt like stone. Elise wasn't there. I opened the door. "Come in," I said. The studio was warm with the scent of chamomile and old wood. I'd baked banana bread, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to feel steady. My husband always said, "Warm hands, firm voice." Daniel looked smaller than I remembered. They sat around the small table, knees nearly touching. I poured the tea. Claire gave me a soft, grateful nod. Mr. Whitaker was the first to speak. "Daniel," he said, "you ignored every clause, every warning. You treated the property like it was yours. It wasn't. It never was." Daniel stared into his cup. "I didn't know." Claire spoke then, quiet but clear. "You didn't ask. And when people stop asking, they stop deserving." I placed a plate of bread between us. No one reached for it. Daniel looked at me, really looked. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked. I smiled softly. "Because saying something hadn't worked in a long time." He nodded. His hands trembled slightly. "I'm not here to beg," he said. "Just to understand what happens now." I lifted my teacup. Beneath it sat the recipe card, creased, stained, written in my husband's slanted handwriting, a quiet reminder of what was once shared and what had been discarded. "You'll receive a formal letter," I said. "There will be no eviction, just a request. You'll leave within the month. No lawsuits, no scandals, but no more pretending." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And me?" he asked. "That's between you and your reflection," I said. Mr. Whitaker stood. Claire followed. Daniel remained seated for a beat longer. He reached toward his cup, then stopped, fingers hovering. I didn't move it toward him. Some things, once poured out, don't get refilled. And some respect, once spilled, must be earned sip by sip. The envelope came by courier, thick, heavy. No return address, just the initials R.W. stamped in gold on the seal. Inside, a stack of documents, bank statements, transfer records, credit pulls, receipts, literal and moral. I read them in silence, one by one, no music, no tea, just me and the truth. Page 5, a series of withdrawals made from a joint savings account Daniel had opened using my name for tax reasons. I never saw those funds, but I saw what they paid for. Page 9, a purchase receipt from a luxury furniture store, Elise's name on the order, a velvet couch I was never allowed to sit on. The payment date? 2 days after they gave me the deadline to leave. Page 11, a pawn shop slip. The item, vintage gold ring, single diamond. The signature, Daniel Ellison. My ring. The one I'd kept in velvet. The one I never wore, but always protected. It had been sold for $210. Not even enough to cover a night at the hotel Elise once sneered at from the car window. I cried then, not because it hurt, but because it no longer surprised me. They had stripped me of so many things, my chair, my seat at the table, my place in the photo frames, but seeing it all reduced to transactions made it feel cheap. And I had never been cheap. I laid the pages across the table, each one a tiny gravestone for a version of my family I used to believe in. Then I gathered them, neatly, precisely. I slipped them into the manila folder where I kept the deed, the recipe card, and my husband's letter. Each piece a stone in the foundation I was now building alone. Not out of revenge, out of memory, out of order, out of the simple, aching demand to be seen as whole. Let them bring words, I'll bring proof. The first email came from Mr. Whitaker's assistant. Subject line, Permit Status Update. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. Still I clicked. Effective immediately, all pending renovation permits for the Ellison property have been rescinded due to contested ownership and breach of disclosure. Simple, clean, unmistakable. The second notice arrived the next day. The contractor was pulling out. Uncomfortable legal exposure. The third, a local investor Daniel had been courting for months had suddenly gone in a different direction. Then Elise's grant application for a boutique design project was quietly denied. No explanation, just silence. That's how it starts when your name begins to rot on paper. I didn't gloat. That would have made me like them. Instead, I cleaned my little studio. I folded towels, reorganized my pantry, lit a lavender candle. I knew enough about storms to recognize when one had landed. There was an unopened letter on my desk. Daniel's handwriting on the envelope, addressed to a tech incubator in San Francisco. The date was from nearly a year ago. Returned to sender. No such office. I held it for a moment. I remembered how excited he was to send it. How Elise boasted at dinner that they'd soon be moving up. Now it sat in my hands, still sealed. A dream unclaimed. I didn't open it. Some letters are better left unread. I tucked it into my drawer beside the documents, the deed, and a teacup saucer with a small chip on the rim. The last piece from the original kitchen set they never asked me about. Outside, the contractor's van pulled away. Elise stood on the porch, her phone clutched tightly, her face pale with disbelief. Daniel wasn't home yet. No one waved goodbye. I closed the window and sat in my chair. I didn't smile.
but I breathed. They mistook my silence for surrender. But I was just giving the storm time to grow. She left in the middle of a Tuesday. No goodbye, no fight. Just doors slamming and suitcase wheels thumping down the porch steps. I stood by the kitchen sink, washing a single spoon. Through the curtain, I watched Elise drag 3 designer suitcases into the car Daniel once bragged had smart climate zones. She was on the phone, arguing with someone. Her voice, usually coated in sugar, had gone sharp and brittle. "I gave up everything for him," she snapped, "and now I'm the one paying for it." I wondered if she knew I could hear her. I don't think she cared. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks on the driveway. One broke. She didn't stop to fix it. I watched her pause at the mailbox. She opened it. Empty. I'd already collected the mail. She looked almost surprised, like the house still owed her something. Then she glanced toward the studio, not at me, just at the building. I saw her blink once, then look away fast. She threw the last bag into the trunk and slammed it shut. Daniel wasn't there. He was still handling things, whatever that meant now. She didn't wait. The engine roared. The tires cracked gravel. Then the car was gone. No wave, no glance back. Nothing. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. There it was, just at the threshold. A single broken heel. Black leather. Clean cut. Left behind like it had no owner. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand. So polished. So hollow. Elise had always been composed. Sharp. Beautiful in that curated way that looked better in photos than in real rooms. But today, there was no lens, no filter, just a woman running. And as her car disappeared down the street, I went back inside, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat at the table I'd built with my husband's hands. She never understood. The house wasn't the prize. I was. Daniel showed up 2 days later with a cardboard box. No warning, no text. I was watering the hydrangeas when I heard the car pull up. Not the sleek black one. They'd taken that back. This one was dented, old, borrowed. He got out slower than usual. No sunglasses, no swagger, just Daniel. He held the box like it was heavy, not in weight, in history. "These were in the attic," he said. "Thought you might want them." I nodded, didn't reach for it. He placed it gently on the steps and didn't look me in the eye. I invited him in. The studio was quiet, warm, tea already steeped. The smell of cardamom lingered in the air. He glanced around, then settled into the chair across from me, the one Elise said was too cramped for guests. He didn't speak for a while. Then he saw it. The small cracked mirror above the wash basin. The one that caught my face the day they told me to pack. I hadn't replaced it. I wanted to remember. He stood in front of it, tilted his head, took himself in. His reflection didn't flinch, but I saw his jaw tense. "This place is smaller than I remembered," he said. "No," I replied. "You just filled more space back then." He sat again. From the box he pulled out a few photos, an old shawl, a tin of buttons. Things that once lived in drawers they emptied without asking. Then his hand paused. He held up the recipe card. Oxtail soup, the one he hadn't touched. The one Elise poured down the drain. He looked at it like it was written in another language. "Will you teach me the soup?" he asked quietly. Not an apology. Not yet. But it was something. A spoon dipped into cold water, ready to be warmed. I took the card from his hands. Maybe we wouldn't make the soup today, but we had ingredients. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked to learn. I laid the recipe card on the counter. Daniel stood beside me, sleeves rolled up, hands too clean to have known labor, but trembling with something close to reverence. "Read it aloud," I said. He cleared his throat. "Oxtail, garlic, onion, bay leaf, carrot, tomato paste." I handed him the knife. "Start with the garlic. You're peeling." He hesitated. "Which part's the garlic again?" I didn't laugh, just pointed. The kitchen was smaller than the one we once shared.
Only one good cutting board, one heavy pot. But the room held something that house never could anymore. Truth. As he worked, I moved around him, pulled out the old wooden spoon, the one my husband used to tap against the lid like a metronome when he thought the stew needed music. The meat browned slowly. The broth began to build. Steam curled upward, sweet and savory, curling into the corners of the room like a memory looking for somewhere to land. Daniel stirred awkwardly. "You used to make this when I was sick," he said. "You were always sick on spelling test days." He smiled. "Just a little." We moved in rhythm. Not perfectly. He dropped a carrot. I let him. He oversalted. I added water. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "I was wrong. About a lot." I didn't speak. Words were good, but they were seasoning, not the base. The soup took 3 hours, and we didn't fill the silence. We let it sit. Sometimes healing doesn't need to be discussed. It needs to be smelled. When it was done, I ladled it carefully. 2 bowls, no garnish, no dramatics. We sat. He took 1 bite, chewed slowly, swallowed, then whispered, "I remember this." I nodded. "It tastes like being safe." We didn't say more, just ate. Not like the old days, but not like strangers either. Some things don't return the way they left. They simmer, they soften, and sometimes, if you're patient enough, they come back warm. Daniel came back the next morning with a notebook in his hand. Not a laptop, not a speech, just a lined paper notebook, the kind with frayed corners and a pen tucked in the spiral. He sat at the table, cleared his throat, and said, "I want to make this right." I poured tea, didn't speak. "I know I can't undo it, but if you tell me what to do, I'll do it." I reached for the old ledger book. My husband used it to track every grocery run, every utility bill, every saved penny for Daniel's future. The spine was cracked, the corners soft from use. I slid it across the table. "We'll write it down," I said. "Not just money, respect, visits, therapy, receipts for everything." Daniel blinked. "Receipts?" I looked him in the eye. "Not just for the ring, for behavior, for effort. You'll show up, and I'll write it down." He didn't flinch. He nodded. And then slowly, he picked up the pen and signed the first line. 9:10 a.m. Sat with Mom, listened fully, agreed to therapy, apologized. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't matter, but because I needed this to be a contract, not a confession. We set rules. He cooks every Friday. He pays back what he took, even if it takes 5 years. He listens when I speak, not with defense, but with presence. Love, without respect, is just a memory of something once sweet. He asked, "Will it ever be like it was?" I closed the book. "No," I said, "but it can still be good if you earn it." He stayed another hour. We drank tea. He told me about the couch he's been sleeping on. I told him about the birds that nest near my studio window. Before he left, he reached for a hug. I gave it, brief, honest. Then I placed the ledger back on the shelf beside the wedding photo and the chipped sugar bowl. Love is not unconditional, not when it's real. The house smells different now, not of citrus candles or fresh paint, but of stew bubbling on the stove, fresh bread from the oven, coffee brewing in a thrifted pot. Every Saturday, we open the front door wide. People come, tired mothers, curious teens, quiet men who just need somewhere to sit. They eat in the dining room where my voice once went unheard. They laugh in the hallway Elise used to call too narrow. Daniel volunteers at the sink. He chops onions without complaining. He wears an apron now, a plain one, no slogans, no armor, just him, sleeves rolled, eyes softer. Claire handles the logistics, permits, grant proposals, the budget. Mr. Whitaker quietly ensures never runs dry. Sometimes Lila runs through the hallways. She calls me Grandmama, even though we're not blood. I don't correct her. The photo wall has changed. I put my husband's portrait back where it belongs, above the mantel, next to a frame with the recipe card, preserved behind glass. Daniel added a new picture last week. The two of us in the kitchen, holding ladles, smiling like people who survived a flood and learned to build boats. The sugar bowl is back too, still chipped, still enough. The community kitchen isn't fancy. Some of the chairs wobble, the floors creak, but the air feels clean, lived in, real. We serve oxtail soup once a month. Daniel stirs the pot. I ladle it out. We don't talk about the day he poured my love down the drain. We don't need to. He's here now, fully. And I'm here too, not as someone clinging to a home, but as someone who finally realized it was never about the walls. It was about what they heard, what they held, what I refused to let go of. Sometimes, after we've locked up, I stand on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the silence. Not the kind that erases, the kind that heals. I reach into my coat pocket. The key is still there. But I don't need it anymore, because the door is open, and so am I.